When HOA President Karen saw my 8-year-old diabetic daughter eating crackers on our porch, she called it a violation. When she snatched Emma's insulin pen in court 3 weeks later, she had no idea that military police were about to storm in and destroy her life forever. Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the small claims courtroom as I sat beside my 8-year-old daughter Emma, watching her pale hands shake slightly as she clutched her insulin pen. She had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes just 6 months ago, and every day since then had been a careful balance of monitoring, medication, and constant worry. Across the aisle sat Karen Mitchell, the HOA president of our neighborhood, Sunset Ridge community. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive suit made her look like she owned the world. In her mind, she probably did own our little corner of it. This whole nightmare had started 3 weeks ago when Emma had been playing in our front yard with her best friend Lucy. They were drawing hopscotch squares on our driveway with colorful chalk when Karen came marching over like a storm cloud. "Excuse me," she had snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This is a violation of Section 12.4 of the HOA guidelines. No chalk art on driveways. It looks trashy and brings down property values." I had tried to explain that Emma was just a child playing innocently, that the chalk would wash away with the next rain. But Karen's eyes had gone cold. "Rules are rules," she had said, pulling out her phone to take pictures. "Clean it up immediately or face a fine." That night, Emma had cried herself to sleep. "Why can't I draw, Daddy? The other kids get to play." My heart had broken watching my little girl, already dealing with so much because of her diabetes, face this cruel restriction on simple childhood joy. The fines had started coming. First $50 for the chalk. Then $100 when Emma left her bicycle on our front lawn for 30 minutes while she came inside for her afternoon blood sugar check and snack. Then another $150 when our garbage can was still visible from the street at 7:01 a.m., 1 minute past the required pickup time. Karen seemed to be watching our house like a hawk, documenting every minor infraction with the dedication of a private investigator. When I tried to talk to her reasonably, she would just smile that cold smile and say, "I don't make the rules, I just enforce them." But the breaking point came last Tuesday. Emma had been having a rough day. Her blood sugar levels had been unpredictable, swinging from too high to too low despite careful monitoring. I had picked her up early from school when the nurse called, worried about her pale complexion and shaky hands. We were sitting on our front porch where I was trying to get Emma to eat some crackers to stabilize her blood sugar, when Karen appeared as if summoned by some evil magic. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. Section 8.2 clearly states that no food consumption is allowed in visible front yard areas. This creates pest problems and appears unsightly to neighbors and potential buyers. I stared at her in disbelief. My daughter is diabetic. She needs to eat these crackers to keep her blood sugar stable. Karen's expression didn't change. "I'm sure you can do that inside your home. Rules apply to everyone equally." "She's 8 years old and she's sick," I said, my voice rising. "Have some human decency." "Sir, I don't appreciate your tone," Karen replied, pulling out her phone. "That will be another $200 fine for violation of community noise ordinances." That night, I made the decision to fight back. I couldn't let this woman continue terrorizing my sick child. I filed a counter lawsuit against the HOA, claiming harassment and discrimination against a disabled minor. Which brought us to today, sitting in this courtroom that smelled of old carpet and broken dreams. Judge Martinez, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, had been listening to our case for the past hour. Karen had presented her evidence with the precision of a prosecutor, showing photos of every alleged violation, citing HOA bylaws with the enthusiasm of someone who had memorized them for fun. When it was my turn to speak, I tried to explain about Emma's condition, about how the constant stress and restrictions were affecting not just her physical health but her emotional well-being. I talked about how she had stopped playing outside, how she asked me every morning if Karen was going to yell at her today. "Your Honor," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "my daughter didn't choose to have diabetes. She didn't choose to need special care and accommodations. All she wants is to be a normal kid who can play in her own yard." I looked over at Emma, who was listening with wide, serious eyes that seemed far too old for her 8-year-old face. That's when it happened. As if on cue, Emma's continuous glucose monitor started beeping. The sound cut through the courtroom like an alarm. Emma looked down at the device on her arm, then up at me with panic in her eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, "it says I'm going low." I immediately reached into my bag for her emergency glucose tablets, but they weren't there. My heart stopped. In the rush to get to court on time, I had forgotten to repack her emergency supplies after yesterday's school pickup. Your Honor, I said quickly, I need a brief recess. My daughter's blood sugar is dropping and I need to get her some fast-acting glucose. But before Judge Martinez could respond, Karen stood up with a self-satisfied smirk. Your Honor, I object to this obvious manipulation. This is clearly a ploy to gain sympathy and disrupt the proceedings. If the child was actually having a medical emergency, wouldn't the father have come prepared? The judge looked uncertain. Mr. Johnson, do you have the necessary medication with you? I have her insulin pen for when her sugar goes high, I said desperately, but I need glucose tablets or juice for when it drops too low. I forgot to repack them this morning. Karen's lawyer whispered something in her ear, and her smile grew wider. Your Honor, Karen said, standing up with theatrical authority, I move that this so-called medical device be confiscated as evidence of the plaintiff's attempts to manipulate these proceedings. Before I could react, before Judge Martinez could respond, before anyone could stop her, Karen reached across the aisle and snatched Emma's insulin pen right out of her small hands. Karen, what are you doing? I shouted, jumping to my feet. Emma started crying immediately, not just from her dropping blood sugar but from the shock and fear of having her lifeline ripped away. This is evidence of manufactured drama, Karen declared, holding the insulin pen high like a trophy. I'm sure this device isn't even real medical equipment. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Judge Martinez was banging her gavel and shouting for order. I was trying to get to Karen to retrieve my daughter's medicine while also trying to comfort Emma, who was now sobbing and shaking. Please, I begged Karen, give me back her insulin. She needs it. If her blood sugar drops too low or goes too high, she could go into a coma. Stop with the theatrics, Karen sneered, holding the pen away from me. Children don't need insulin. That's an adult medication. That's when the courtroom doors burst open. 2 military police officers in full uniform strode in with the kind of authority that makes everyone stop and pay attention. Behind them walked a man in army dress blues with more ribbons on his chest than I could count. What the hell is going on in here? The army officer demanded, his voice carrying the kind of command that could stop a riot. Judge Martinez banged her gavel again. Sir, this is a closed courtroom proceeding. You can't just. Ma'am, with all due respect, the officer interrupted, that woman is currently holding my granddaughter's life-saving medication hostage, and my son called me in a panic saying his diabetic child was in medical distress. My jaw dropped. I turned to look at the officer more closely, and despite the years in the uniform I recognized him. Colonel James Mitchell. Karen's father-in-law. The man she constantly bragged about being married to his son, the man whose military connections she claimed gave her authority in the neighborhood. Dad. Karen said, her face going white. What are you doing here? How did you? I was having lunch with retired Judge Williams when he got a call from his colleague Judge Martinez about a medical emergency involving a child, Colonel Mitchell said, his eyes locked on the insulin pen in Karen's hand. Imagine my surprise when I found out that my son's wife was the one preventing a diabetic child from receiving medical care. One of the MP officers stepped forward. Ma'am, we need you to return that medical device immediately. I don't understand, Karen stammered, suddenly looking very small. This is just a civil case about HOA violations. This man is trying to make his daughter seem sicker than she is to get out of paying fines. Colonel Mitchell walked over to Emma, who was still crying and shaking. He knelt down to her level, his stern military bearing softening into grandfatherly concern. Hey there, sweetheart, he said gently. What's your name? Emma, she whispered through her tears. Emma, how are you feeling right now? Can you tell me what's happening with your blood sugar? Emma showed him her glucose monitor. It says 68 and it's going down. I'm scared and I feel shaky. The colonel's face hardened as he stood up and faced Karen. Karen Elizabeth Mitchell, you are currently withholding life-saving medication from a diabetic child. Do you understand the legal and medical implications of what you're doing? But I thought they were just making it up, Karen said weakly. Kids don't really have diabetes, do they? The MP officer stepped closer. Ma'am, type 1 diabetes can develop in children as young as infancy. What you're holding is an insulin pen that this child needs to survive. If her blood sugar goes too high without insulin, she could die. Now please return the medication immediately. Judge Martinez had been watching this entire exchange with growing horror. Mrs. Mitchell, return that medical device to the child's father immediately, or I will hold you in contempt of court. With shaking hands, Karen extended the insulin pen toward me. But Colonel Mitchell intercepted it first, examining it carefully. "This is a legitimate prescription insulin pen," he said loudly enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "Prescribed by Dr. Sarah Chin at Children's Hospital for Emma Johnson, age 8, diagnosed with type 1 diabetes." He read the prescription label aloud, then handed it to me with a respectful nod. I immediately took Emma's blood sugar and gave her glucose tablets that the bailiff had rushed to get from the vending machine. As we waited for her levels to stabilize, Colonel Mitchell addressed the court. "Your Honor, I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but I felt it was necessary to intervene when I learned that my daughter-in-law was potentially endangering a child's life over what appears to be a petty HOA dispute." He turned to face Karen, who was now sitting down and looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Karen, I am deeply disappointed in your behavior. As the wife of my son, an active-duty Marine, you represent not only our family but the military community. The way you have conducted yourself today is disgraceful." I didn't know," Karen whispered. "I thought they were exaggerating." "You didn't know because you didn't care to know," Colonel Mitchell replied sternly. "You were so focused on your petty power games that you couldn't see a sick child who needed compassion, not persecution." He walked over to the judge's bench. "Your Honor, I would like to request permission to address some facts that may be relevant to this case." Judge Martinez nodded, still looking shaken by what had just transpired. "Mrs. Mitchell has been claiming for months that her position as an HOA president carries some kind of official authority because of her connection to the military through marriage," Colonel Mitchell began. "I want to make it clear that she has no official standing whatsoever. Her actions today and apparently over the past several weeks are not representative of military values or conduct." He paused and looked directly at Karen. "Furthermore, I have just learned from my son that Karen has been intercepting and hiding his mail from me for the past year, including letters about family events and medical updates. He had no idea about Emma's diabetes diagnosis, or he would have reached out to offer support immediately." The second MP officer stepped forward. "Your Honor, we've also discovered that Mrs. Mitchell has been falsely representing herself as having official military authority when dealing with vendors and service providers in the community. This constitutes fraud and impersonation of military personnel." Karen started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic as she realized how much trouble she was in. "Dad, please," she begged. "I was just trying to maintain community standards. Property values are important. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." "You targeted a disabled child," Colonel Mitchell said quietly, and somehow his low voice was more frightening than if he had yelled. "You made that little girl's life miserable because you were too selfish and cruel to show basic human decency." Emma tugged on my sleeve. Her color was returning to normal as her blood sugar stabilized, but she still looked frightened. "Daddy," she whispered, "is the mean lady going to keep being mean to us?" The question hit the courtroom like a physical blow. In her innocent words, Emma had summed up the core issue better than all our legal arguments combined. Judge Martinez stood up, her face set in stern lines. "Mrs. Mitchell, I am appalled by what I have witnessed here today. Not only did you show callous disregard for a child's medical condition, but you actually seized her medication in what can only be described as an act of malicious endangerment." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I am dismissing all HOA fines against the Johnson family immediately. Furthermore, I am issuing a restraining order preventing you from any further contact with the Johnson family or their property. Any violations of this order will result in immediate arrest." But she wasn't finished. "Additionally, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges related to child endangerment, harassment of a disabled minor, and fraud. The military police will handle the charges related to your impersonation of military authority." Karen was openly sobbing now. "Please, Your Honor, I made a mistake. I didn't understand. Can't we just forget this happened?" "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Martinez said coldly, "you didn't make a mistake. You made a series of deliberate choices to torment a sick child and her family. The fact that you only express regret now that you're facing consequences shows that you haven't learned anything from this experience." Colonel Mitchell approached the bench again. "Your Honor, I would like to make a personal statement if I may." At the judge's nod, he turned to address both Karen and the courtroom. "My grandson Tommy is stationed overseas right now, serving his country with honor and distinction. When he hears about what his wife has done to an innocent family, to a sick child, he is going to be devastated. Karen, you have not only damaged your own reputation and possibly destroyed your freedom, but you have brought shame on a good man who is risking his life for his country." He walked over to where Emma and I were sitting. Emma had stopped crying and was watching everything with wide, curious eyes. Emma, sweetheart, I want to apologize on behalf of my family for what Karen did to you. What she did was wrong and it will never happen again. Emma looked up at him with the serious expression that had become too familiar since her diagnosis. Are you really Karen's family? She asked. Her father-in-law, yes. But that doesn't mean I agree with what she did. Emma nodded solemnly. My daddy says that families don't always agree, but they should always love each other and be kind. Colonel Mitchell's eyes grew misty. Your daddy is a very wise man, Emma. And you are a very brave little girl. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small military challenge coin. This is a special coin that we give to people who show real courage. I think you've shown more courage dealing with your diabetes and standing up to bullies than some soldiers I know. I'd be honored if you'd accept this. Emma took the coin with both hands, examining it carefully. It's really pretty. Thank you, sir. As the courtroom began to clear, one of the MP officers approached Karen with handcuffs. Mrs. Mitchell, you're under arrest for child endangerment, fraud, and impersonation of military personnel. You have the right to remain silent. Karen's cries echoed through the hallway as she was led away in handcuffs. Several people in the courtroom had pulled out their phones to record the arrest, and I knew that by evening, the whole neighborhood would know what had happened. But I wasn't thinking about revenge or justice in that moment. I was thinking about Emma, who was sitting quietly beside me, turning the challenge coin over and over in her small hands. Daddy, she said softly, does this mean I can draw with chalk in our driveway again? The simple question broke my heart all over again. Through everything she had endured, the diagnosis, the lifestyle changes, the constant medical monitoring, and Karen's cruelty, my little girl just wanted to draw hopscotch squares on her driveway. Yes, sweetheart, I said, pulling her close. You can draw all the hopscotch squares you want, and we're going to buy the biggest box of sidewalk chalk they make. Emma smiled for the first time in weeks. Can Lucy come over and draw with me? Of course she can. As we walked out of the courthouse, Colonel Mitchell fell into step beside us. Mr. Johnson, he said, I hope you'll allow me to make amends for my daughter-in-law's behavior. I'd like to help cover any medical expenses or legal costs you've incurred because of this situation. I shook my head. That's very kind of you, Colonel, but this wasn't your fault. Perhaps not directly, he replied, but Karen was representing our family name and she disgraced it. The least I can do is help repair some of the damage she caused. He paused at the courthouse steps. I also want you to know that my grandson Tommy is coming home on emergency leave next week. When he hears about what happened, he'll want to apologize in person and probably bring Emma enough military coins to fill a treasure chest. Emma looked up at him hopefully. Will he really? I guarantee it, sweetheart. He's got a little girl of his own, and he's going to be heartbroken when he learns how mean Karen was to you. 3 weeks later, our front driveway looked like a rainbow had exploded on it. Emma and Lucy had spent the afternoon creating an elaborate chalk masterpiece that covered every inch of concrete. There were hopscotch squares, flowers, dragons, and even a portrait of Emma's new friend Tommy, Colonel Mitchell's grandson, who had indeed come home and spent an entire day playing with Emma and teaching her about military traditions. Karen was facing serious charges and had been kicked out of the HOA by an emergency vote of the homeowners. Her husband Tommy had filed for divorce the day after he returned from overseas, unable to forgive her for targeting a sick child. The house across the street had a for sale sign in the yard. As I watched Emma carefully test her blood sugar before joining Lucy for another round of hopscotch, I thought about how dramatically our lives had changed. Not just because of Karen's cruelty, but because of the unexpected kindness we had found in the aftermath. Colonel Mitchell had become like a grandfather to Emma, visiting regularly and always bringing new books about brave kids who overcame challenges. Judge Martinez had called personally to check on Emma's health. Even the MP officers had stopped by to see how she was doing. But the most important change was in Emma herself. She was still dealing with diabetes every day, but she was no longer living in fear. She played outside with confidence, knowing that the neighborhood was safe for her again. She talked about her diabetes openly with her friends, educating them about what it meant and how they could help if she ever needed assistance. Daddy, Emma called from the driveway, look what I drew. I walked over to see a chalk drawing of a little girl holding hands with what looked like a police officer and a soldier. That's you and me and Colonel Mitchell and Officer Rodriguez, she explained proudly. They're my heroes because they protected me from the mean lady. What about you, Em? I asked. Don't you think you're pretty heroic too? Emma considered this seriously, tilting her head the way she did when she was thinking hard about something. I guess I am brave, she said finally. I give myself shots every day, and I stood up in court even when I was scared, and I forgave the mean lady even though she was really mean to me. You forgave Karen? I asked, surprised. Ah. Colonel Mitchell said that forgiveness doesn't mean what she did was okay, but it means I don't have to carry around angry feelings that make me feel bad. He said that's what real strength looks like. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that rivaled Emma's chalk artwork, I realized that this whole ordeal had taught us both something important about resilience, kindness, and the power of community. Karen had tried to make our lives miserable, but in doing so, she had accidentally introduced us to people who would become lifelong friends and protectors. She had thought she was isolated in her cruelty, but she had actually been surrounded by people who were ready to stand up for what was right the moment they understood what was happening. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at me with those wise 8-year-old eyes. Daddy, do you think Karen learned her lesson? I hope so, sweetheart. Sometimes people have to face consequences before they understand that their actions hurt others. I hope she did learn, Emma said softly. Because being mean all the time must make her feel really sad inside. I wouldn't want to feel like that. As I turned off her light and kissed her goodnight, I marveled at my daughter's capacity for compassion. Even after everything Karen had put her through, Emma could still find it in her heart to feel sympathy for the woman who had made her life so difficult. Outside, the chalk drawings glowed faintly in the moonlight, a colorful testament to a little girl's resilience and joy. Tomorrow, Emma would check her blood sugar, take her insulin, and probably create another masterpiece on our driveway. But tonight, she was just a happy kid who had learned that even when people try to dim your light, there are always others ready to help you shine brighter. The HOA Karen who had tried to steal my daughter's childhood, and nearly her life, was gone. But the community that had rallied to protect Emma would be there forever, a reminder that kindness and justice always win in the end.